Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a record collection update video. I know that I, not too long ago, finished completing my tour through my entire 700 plus record collection, and I suppose I wasn't really expecting to have a substantial update video particularly soon. But it appears as though I do, judging by the stack of, I don't know, 15-ish records that I have lying next to me. The post-Christmas splurge was real, we'll put it that way. Although thankfully the damage to my bank account wasn't as severe as it could have been, or that it will look like when you see what I have over yonder. But nevertheless, we persist. Very excited to talk about these records. Some of these are ones that I have wanted in my collection literally for years, and it's really cool to have them. A lot of my favorite records that I kind of still have left to collect on vinyl are kind of contained in this little video here. And I'm actually going to start out. So this is I should say this is an update for mostly January of 2024. That's most of what I bought here. There is a little bit of February in here, but don't tell anybody. Okay. All right, but we're going to start with a CD. I haven't talked anything about my CD collection, and I'm pretty sure I'm probably not going to do a video or a series of videos on my CD collection, at least not in the near future. There's just way too much material to go through. It would be a lot more difficult than the vinyl video, and probably wouldn't interest quite as many people. But if you think I'm wrong about that, let me know. So I'm going to start with this. I'm going to try to angle that a little bit. This is the self-titled record by Victor. Now, what is Victor? Victor is a project run by the guitarist Alex Lifeson of the band Rush. People call this a Lifeson solo project, and it is a solo project. However, it is technically released under the name Victor. It is advertised as Victor. On the back, it only says produced by Alex Lifeson. It's not technically released under his name, is my point. But that's really splitting hairs. It's an Alex Lifeson solo project. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have not heard this record before. Nor have I heard the other solo record by Rush, Geddy Lee's My Favorite Headache, although I do own that one on CD. And that was kind of the overall kind of overarching point. I've been in kind of a Rush kick lately, listening to some of their records, watching some of the concert DVDs that I have owned for a little while, but haven't cracked into as much. It's been really cool. Been really kind of getting back into them lately. And this was like one of the only pieces I have left. I think there's live stuff. There's a few live albums that I haven't invested in yet. But as far as studio stuff goes, I own all the studio albums on CD. I own several of them on vinyl. And I already owned My Favorite Headache, so it was just a matter of getting this. I'm happy to own it. Actually got it from somebody in Minnesota, so very happy about the local connection there. And it was cheaper than it normally is. It went for about $10, and that CD can go for $20 to $30 easily. So really cool to have that. Really cool to own that, and really cool. Really excited to listen to it at some point in the near future. But let's get to the records. And we're going to start with an EP, which I don't really have that much of, but I did want to make sure that I got this. This is boygenius, The Rest, the follow-up EP from their debut full-length record, The Record, from early 2023. Now, I loved the record. I thought that was fantastic, and I listened to that pretty shortly after it came out, because I knew the original EP was good. The original EP is very strong, and the record did not disappoint. I thought it was a fantastic full length, and I'm really grateful, really happy to see that it got the acclaim that I think everyone expected it to at the Grammy Awards, but it's still nice to kind of see that other side of the coin there. And then there's this. This I actually delayed on listening to for quite a while, because it is a little bit of a leftovers record, just kind of by definition. But when I did listen to it, I was pleasantly surprised at how well I think the first side of this holds up. I think Black Hole and Afraid of Heights both stand up to some of the best stuff on the record. or at least the mid-tier stuff, if not the absolute best. Afraid of Heights in particular, I love that song. I thought the second side is good. It is good, but admittedly, I can understand why those two tracks were left off. I think they stylistically clash a little bit more, and just in terms of feeling like fully fleshed out material, I don't know that they're quite on the same level as any of their other studio stuff beforehand. But this is still, I'm happy to own this, and I'm very supportive in what of all three of them and what they're doing and how they are, I think, in a lot of ways trying to reinvent the idea of the rock band for the 2020s, and I think really embodying this idea that the real rock and roll is actually coming from a lot of queer circles right now. That's where a lot of the interesting kind of heavier rock, you call it indie rock, call it alternative, call it what you want. But I think a lot of the most interesting sounds and a lot of the most interesting personalities are coming from those scenes. And I think that's where you're getting a lot of the most interesting songwriting in rock and music today, because that's where a lot of the most interesting storytelling, a lot of the most interesting stories come from. And I think boygenius is really the manifestation of that, and it's so cool to kind of see the success that they've had. Okay, so now we're going to get into, I only have one record that's really a used pickup. Everything else is pretty much new or like new. And that used record is going to be the Carpenters' Horizon. Depending on the day, this is a contender for my favorite Carpenters record. It has probably the best sound of any Carpenters record. I think Only Yesterday, Please Mr. Postman, and Solitaire are the most famous tracks on the record. I think they were the three singles. But, oh man, this album sounds so good. It's some of the best vocal production on any Carpenters record to me. It's getting into, I was going to say this is getting into like the cheesier side of the band, but they were always cheesy, weren't they? This is getting into the really kind of MOR stuff that they're going to be doing like in the late 70s and the early 80s. Like, it's getting to that point, but we haven't quite crossed the threshold. This is still really, really well done soft pop. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Carpenters, I think, are a band that get a little bit, they sort of bear the brunt of a lot of people's criticisms of the early 70s and that sound. And I understand why, and they're very unassuming, they're very white bread in a lot of ways, but man, there's, the songs that they are performing and the songs that they are singing, even if they're not their own, are really well done for the most part. And I think their interpretations of those songs hold up pretty well. Like, as far as like examples of arrangements go, they're really, really solid stuff. So happy to own that. Their records are so freaking cheap, so I could easily, I think, get complete on them with just a little bit of exploration. This was a hell of a find. This is Regina Spektor's Soviet Kitsch. This, I believe, is an original pressing. If it's not an original pressing, it's like of that era, mid-2000s. I love Soviet Kitsch. I'm a big Regina Spektor fan. I haven't quite transcended to the level of I'm an enormous fan, like I would say for like Fiona Apple, for instance. Or Tori Amos, at least like her early stuff. Like, I'm not quite at that level with Regina Spektor's music, but I really appreciate the sort of eccentric approach that she has to music making. I think her voice is extremely interesting. Again, the kind of piano-centric songwriting, I have to say, I'm a sucker for that. Love some of the tracks on here, like Carbon Monoxide, Us, Sailor Song, of course. It's, Soviet Kitsch, definitely my favorite of hers. I've not heard her most recent album, maybe her most recent 2 records, but she's also a consistent and pretty high floor artist as well. Like Tori Amos, I think, is an example of an artist where there's been a couple of Tori Amos records that I've not been too keen on over the years, but Regina, I think, is pretty, like, there's a pretty consistent level of quality in her music that I really appreciate. The next record that I have to show you here is Tori Amos. This is Boys for Pele. What a thing to own this record now. This thing was out of print on vinyl for an extended period of time, and even just as recently as a few months ago, when I was trying to potentially investigate purchasing this. This record was extremely hard to come by, and that's still the case for From the Choir Girl Hotel, which I would like to own, and hopefully she reissues this as well. But I don't like this record quite as much as the two that came before it. But Little Earthquakes is one of my favorite records of all time, so that's to be expected. But I think this is still a little bit, I'm not as likely to put this one on as I am Under the Pink. I think there's a little bit, like, I appreciate the choice to have more of a Baroque influence here. I do respect that and acknowledge that. And I don't know. It's, you know, it's not necessarily my preferred Amos sound, even if I think the songwriting here is really interesting, and in some cases is some of the most interesting stuff she's ever done, I think. It is also just kind of a lot. Again, it's a, you know, double record, as it were. So, you know, there's a lot of material on here, and it's a little bit of a more of an event type of record than something like Under the Pink is. Under the Pink, I think, is a lot more easy to kind of consume in one go. But this is still incredibly strong. I still have a lot of deep affection for this album. And I'm, like I said, just super happy to finally have that as part of the collection. And I look forward to hopefully expanding my Tori collection at least a little bit more. Again, unfortunately, she's an artist where a lot of my favorite stuff of hers is like really early on. And I think it does fall off quality-wise after a while. But, you know, such is life, I suppose. Okay, this is kind of an interesting find, and I still have a sticky note here that I'll take off. This is Greenfields, the Gibb Brothers Songbook Volume 1. Technically advertised as a solo record for from Barry Gibb, and I would consider it that. But it's a Barry Gibb solo record in the way that the Beach Boys' Stars and Stripes is a Beach Boys record. Barry Gibb is very much a sideman here, or a like duet partner. A lot of these songs are, these are like, you know, classic Bee Gees tracks for the most part, where Gibb is collaborating with country artists. Now, to be fair, I made the Stars and Stripes comparison here. This is absolutely a stronger lineup of musicians than Stars and Stripes. You know, Stars and Stripes had Willie Nelson as like by far the biggest name on it, whereas this one has Dolly Parton, Sheryl Crow, Keith Urban, Jason Isbell, Brandi Carlile, Miranda Lambert, Little Big Town, Olivia Newton-John, the recently departed Olivia Newton-John. I mean, a lot of big names on here. Now, the record itself is fine. You know, it's pretty safe. It is what you expect, and I do think because of that, it is better than the Beach Boys' Stars and Stripes. But I'm still happy to own it. This was only $10 for this pretty much brand new record. And, you know, I own the other two Barry Gibb solo records, so of course I was going to get this just to say that I'm complete on him. Happy to own it. But now we get into some really just remarkable stuff. I mean, it's pretty much across the board good to great so far, but now we're going to get into some juicy ones. Daft Punk, Random Access Memories. This is the 10th anniversary edition, which contains a bonus record with demos and studio outtakes of, you know, the sessions for this record. Daft Punk, I really like every Daft Punk record quite a bit. I think Discovery and Homework are both fantastic, and I would totally understand why some people would have either of those two records as their favorite Daft Punk album. I think Random Access Memories just kind of speaks to something that's a little bit more, I don't know, personal to me. I think it's just that connection with the 70s kind of soul sound that I really love. It's just kind of a weak spot for me. It's a reason why I'm partial to so much of like 2010s hip hop and that sort of thing. I think the Pharrell Williams influence here is palpable. I think all the guest collaborators like Julian Casablancas and Paul Williams and everybody else who's on here, I think just add so much. But also they fit in neatly. Like Paul Williams, for instance, is not a guy who I would automatically think would fit in well on a Daft Punk record, but he comes in and slots in, and it's just so effective. And it's so respectful and so tasteful. I love it. I love every second of this album. I think it's one of the best albums of the 2010s. And I think it's endured, and I think it's going to continue to endure. But I guess in a way, I'm curious what the album's reputation will end up being in the long run. Is this a record that changed the game and changed the history of pop music? I don't know that you could say that, but it feels like a peak, nevertheless. It feels like we've hit some sort of apex of something, to my, uninformed ears, I suppose. And I think that in itself is a remarkable and very valuable thing, and I think that's really awesome. So yeah, love it. We're adding to the David Bowie collection because this one I found at a discount. And again, like I try to get 90s Bowie records, periodically, even if I'm not crazy about them, because that's the stuff that's going to be the hardest to find, generally speaking. And if they stop printing the 90s records, and these things are going to go up in price, and well, then they'll become impossible to find again. At least that's the fear. So, Buddha of Suburbia. The Buddha of Suburbia is, I don't know. I mean, it's bottom half Bowie for me, I think pretty easily. And it is very much a record that, I don't know. It sort of just kind of sits in an awkward place where it's sort of a transition between Black Tie, White Noise and Outside, but also isn't super intentionally so. I don't know. Like it does not feel very significant. It feels slightly transitional, but mostly just kind of feels like it exists. And that's because it's a soundtrack record, right? But boy, man, when this record pops, when this record hits, it hits hard. I love stuff like the title track, Sex in the Church, South Horizon, the original version of Strangers When We Meet. Just the darker ideas, the kind of more industrial and, again, darker kind of English tones that he is working with on these records is a side of Bowie that is underappreciated, I think, consistently. I think this is some of the most creative stuff he ever did at this point. Even if I don't think Buddha of Suburbia is like the apex of that, I think the apex is Outside, is Earthling. Frankly, even is Black Tie, White Noise to an extent, just with the influence of jazz on that record. But yeah, Buddha of Suburbia, really cool. Happy to own that album. And we move on. I talked about Fiona Apple earlier. I have been I only had Fetch the Bolt Cutters when I started this record collection saga. I now have Tidal and When the Pawn to add to that because those were recently released. In fact, her whole catalog was recently re-released on vinyl. So I'm glad to add the Idler Wheel to my collection. The Idler Wheel is very much like, I think does it feel disrespectful to call it the proto Fetch the Bolt Cutters? Maybe, but the strengths overlap to me so much. This is the album where I think Fiona really just kind of strips it back and starts completely doing away with the idea of writing conventional pop or rock songs. she is very much embodying this like minimalistic space on these tracks, like Werewolf, like Hot Knife, especially. And it's, you know, it's a challenge. I don't think I enjoyed this record. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I think I enjoyed this record when I first heard it, but I didn't understand it. And maybe I still don't, but I at least appreciate it on a bigger level than I did before. And for that, I think, you know, that's just something to be grateful for. Really happy about that. Fantastic album. It's probably like my fourth favorite Fiona Apple. It's probably my least favorite out of the ones that I view to be like essentially classics. I think Extraordinary Machine is a step down from that, although it's still a very, very good album in its own right, and I probably will pick it up at some point. But yeah, Idler Wheel. Very happy to add that to the collection, and really happy just to be almost complete on Fiona Apple, an artist who at this time last year I really would not have expected to be complete on so soon. All right. Those were all ones that I picked up in store, except for Random Access Memories. That one was a online purchase. The rest of these are online purchases, all from my good friends at Barnes & Noble. Obviously, they're not sponsoring this video. I don't have sponsors, but shout out to Barnes & Noble. We start with Kate Bush, and we start with The Dreaming. Man, I almost owned this record several years ago. When I was in a record store in Mound, Minnesota, and a friend of mine and I were looking for records. I came across The Dreaming and I considered buying it, and then I ended up putting it back. And my friend actually ended up buying that copy of The Dreaming, and I was like, well, you are a smarter person than I am. I probably should not have put that back, but I'm glad he owns it. And now, several years later, I finally own it too. I mean, what can you say about The Dreaming? It is, I talk about like the Idler Wheel and how just kind of eccentric and, dare I say, batshit it is. But The Dreaming is very much that, just with a more prototypical pop production for the day. Like the song ideas and the instrumentation stagger everything enough to where I'm still not going to mistake this for being an accessible record, but this is more conventional instrumentation in general. And the arrangement is kind of where things just kind of go off the rails, but in the best way possible. This is another album where I did not get this at first. I knew people were enthusiastic about it because of the vocals on it were really strange, that it represented a quantum leap forward as far as her approach to making music in general compared to Never Forever, the record that came before it. But again, at first I was just kind of like, I don't understand this. I know this is good on some level. I know this is extremely well done, but I cannot, it's not clicking. Well, finally it clicked. And it's up there. It's second or third favorite Kate Bush record, and some days it might even be my favorite. I think every song on here is consistently really strong and really quirky. And maybe there are times where like that's not what I'm in the mood for. This is maybe not the type of record that I'm going to put on at any time of day. I think The Sensual World is something that I think is more suited for kind of casual listening, if you will. But The Dreaming is something where if you want to just kind of be entertained, or I think challenged maybe would be a better word for it, The Dreaming is one that I would definitely put on. And if you're someone who's tried listening to it and it hasn't clicked with you, I understand why. I would say keep trying. That's what I had to do. I had to keep trying with that record, and eventually I got to the point where I was like, yes, this is solidly good. Okay, Jazz Time. This record has been on my list for so long, and I have looked for it in stores, and I've had such a pain in the ass time finding it. So to own it finally, especially with that Impulse label, that Impulse Records classic label on here, so excited. I think it's the first one of these that I've owned. Charles Mingus, The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. Possibly the greatest jazz album ever recorded, possibly my favorite jazz album. Hard to say. I mean, the nostalgic person in me would go back to like Vince Guaraldi, Charlie Brown Christmas. Hard to beat that. Hard to beat, some Miles Davis records too. Kind of Blue being the obvious choice, but I also very much steer towards like In a Silent Way, for instance. So yeah, really great stuff. But yeah, again, really hard to find, surprisingly. So I'm extremely glad to own it now. Yeah, I think Mingus's style and Mingus's approach to jazz music is so incredibly captivating and just so unique because his style is not free jazz. It is very much this, progressive big band is what they call it, right? It is this idea of approaching jazz music with these kind of larger ensembles, but also exploring tonal areas that you don't really hear apart from like free jazz. But again, it's not quite as unrestrained as free jazz is. It's just very grandiose, very progressive, I think. I come back to that term, but I think it works. I think it's fitting. Yeah, just incredibly happy to own this record. Incredibly grateful to finally put that one to rest. And I look forward to getting more Mingus records. Mingus Pithecanthropus erectus, other ones that I know I'm forgetting. There's a lot of strong stuff on the Mingus catalog, and I'm really excited to keep adding to that and to keep adding to my jazz collection in general. That's an area that I want to keep expanding on and make intention for. Swans, the Seer. I don't usually give shout outs, but I'm going to shout out my buddy Miroslav, who has a YouTube channel of his own where he just did a Swans discography ranking. Swans, it's hard to call them underrepresented because they are represented by the biggest person in the music criticism world today, that being Anthony Fantano, of course. But I think compared to some of the other artists and bands that he reps, namely like Death Grips, I think the barrier of entry to Swans is even more challenging because of the size of their catalog, the lengths of their records. Say what you will about Death Grips, but and there's certainly, I don't think there's an easy barrier of entry there, but Death Grips, I think, has a more active community that helps foster that engagement, helps kind of welcome people in, and their records are shorter, right? The Seer, this beast right here, is like 2 hours long. The same can be said with To Be Kind, the record that Fantano most famously champions. The same can be said for Soundtracks for the Blind. I mean, this band makes long-ass records, and they have, 15 of them or whatever it is, going back to the early 80s when they're in the no-wave scene. And no-wave music does not have an easy barrier of entry either. So all of this is to say, like, check out Miro's channel, check out his discography ranking. That was kind of my point of that. I got sidetracked. Anyways, I don't know if The Seer is my favorite Swans record overall, but it's certainly a contender. That I think Soundtracks for the Blind is interesting because it feels like a final statement in a lot of ways. Like, it does feel like a band that is wrapping it up and is trying to kind of give it everything they've got. And then all of a sudden they come back in the 2010s, and it's kind of one of these improbable comeback scenarios where, after at least their first comeback record, which I generally remember the title, but I know I'm going to get all the words wrong, so I'll pass that. Apart from that first record, which I think is fine, you then get to this. And The Seer, to me, picks up in some ways right where Soundtracks left off, and in some ways I think just kind of progresses into even darker and more abrasive sounds somehow. And To Be Kind, I think, just continues that and extrapolates it further. And it's one of these really just odd moments of 2010s music that is so, it's remarkable, and yet that impressiveness will be lost on many people, because this music is not accessible. It is not the type of, approach to making music. When we talk about heavy music, people talk about heavy metal and they talk about like progressive metal, power metal, whatever the hell. And that stuff sounds lightweight and feathery as shit compared to what Swans is doing. This is heaviness. This is darkness. This is gritty. And, it's probably a representation of the person who's making that music. Obviously, plenty of not great things have come out about Michael Gira in recent years, but there's a lot here. And I think it is probably one of the great comebacks in music history. But again, the average person is not going to really appreciate that because the barrier of entry is just way too damn high. Swans challenged me a lot when I got into their discography. I've listened to pretty much every album, but The Seer is one of the ones that I was just kind of, you have to take a step back and just be wowed by the experience, be wowed by those guitar tones. I just recently listened to Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, and I think it's a lot of that same type of idea. Loveless has hooks, right? There's no doubt about it. Like, I'm not going to find the types of hooks on The Seer or on To Be Kind that I will on Loveless, but it's the same type of idea where it is the sound, it is the experience that just envelops you and draws you in. And in Swan's case, they're doing that shit for 2 hours at a time. And that's pretty impressive. Okay, winding down, 3 more records to go. First one, National with Laugh Track. This is their most recent record from 2023. I was surprised at how much I liked Laugh Track. First 2 Pages of Frankenstein is a contender for their weakest record. I would probably still go the debut for that. But Laugh Track, to me, I think is a massive step up. It is my favorite National project since Sleep Well Beast. And I don't know if I think it's because the previous 2 albums, I Am Easy to Find and First 2 Pages of Frankenstein, are remarkably sedate. They play up that angle really effectively. And that's fine. I like sleepy National. That's all well and good to me. That's great. But sometimes it is a little bit difficult to sit through that with for like an hour at a time. At least with I Am Easy to Find, there's the novelty of kind of the collaboration with female singers and that type of thing. And it does kind of break the mold a little bit. But First 2 Pages of Frankenstein don't really have that as much. I think most of the actual collaborators on that record are pretty anonymous, like Sufjan, Phoebe Bridgers in the background. The Taylor Swift one stands out. That one I like. But Laugh Track, I think you have more of that return to rock music that you had in like a Sleep Well Beast. I love the Bon Iver collaboration, Weird Goodbyes. I think the Phoebe Bridgers collaboration on Here is interesting. And then the borderline country sounding Crumble with Roseanne Cash surprised me at how much I like that. And there's other great stuff here. Like, I think Space Invader is fascinatingly abrasive at the end. I really like Hornets too. It's just, it felt like a step up, and it's kind of surprising that this record turned out as it did to me. And it gives me a little bit more hope for the band going in more interesting directions in the future, because admittedly it did feel a little bit like they were kind of settling into a sound, and that was going to be kind of the Dessner sound that Aaron has now popularized with acts like Folklore and that type of thing. And a little bit on this release, Big Red Machine. How long do you think it's going to last? So Big Red Machine, again, that's the collaboration between Aaron Dessner and Justin Vernon from Bon Iver. I already own their first self-titled record, which is, to me, patchy. It's pretty hit or miss. I do think the strong moments there are really strong, and I like the concept behind it, but it is definitely sparse, sometimes I think to a fault. How long do you think it's going to last feels a lot more like a National record. It feels like Big Red Machine is like Justin Vernon continuing that 22 a million theme. How long do you think it's going to last is a bit more of a, like, this feels like more contemporary National in a lot of ways. And that is emphasized by the fact that this record has collaborators out the ass. Anais Mitchell is on like a third of the songs here. Taylor Swift is on 2 songs here. Only one of which sounds like it's a continuation of the Folklore Evermore songs. Renegade absolutely feels like an Evermore outtake, but Birch is interesting because Swift is singing backing vocals on that one to Justin Vernon. And that one feels more like a national song that Taylor's guesting on. That one's cool. And then I have to shout out Fleet Foxes on this record, the song Phoenix. I think that one is very much in the vein of the Shore record that they released the same year, or no, a year before this Big Red Machine one came out, 2020 and 2021. Phoenix is great. Love the piano in that one. And it's just very bright. I love how Robin Pecknold and Justin Vernon's voices kind of bounce off of each other. And I saw that one performed live with Fleet Foxes. And one of the other members of the band, whose name escapes me at the moment, took over the Justin Vernon parts and did a very laudable job of it too. And shout out to the Ghost of Cincinnati on this album, which I really like this album. I like this album a lot, if you couldn't tell. But shout out to the Ghost of Cincinnati for being maybe the best Elliott Smith impression I've ever heard. It's certainly up there. It's got that perfect like double track guitar and double tracked vocal approach. Dessner singing the vocals, and he's got that kind of breathy sound that feels very Elliott like. It captures it immaculately to my ears. So really, really pleased with that. Really like that record. And we're going to finish the very last one here with Tori Amos again. This is a Record Store Day exclusive release from last year. I think there were like 10,000 copies of these pressed or something. That is Little Earthquakes, the B-sides. Some of the B-sides, not all of them, but there are some B-sides from the Little Earthquakes record that do they hold up, like do they stand up to what is actually on the album? No, but they come closer than you would expect. Like they'd stand up to something that might be on like a Boys for Pele, for instance. And I don't think anything stands out for me more than Upside Down. I think Upside Down is an amazing song and is pretty much worth the price of admission alone. I think maybe if you could argue what keeps it from being like a genuine maybe album contender is that it occasionally like peters off into a bit of nothing, but it also feels like the formlessness of it is kind of the point. And that piano riff is just super engaging and stands up with pretty much any other piano riff that she wrote on Little Earthquakes. Yeah, I will say that this does not have the Smells Like Teen Spirit cover that she kind of popularized in the early 90s. But I think that's a small price to pay, probably a difficult thing to get licensing for, frankly. I'm grateful to own this. Again, Little Earthquakes, when I say that this is potentially like a top 5 album for me of all time, I'm not exaggerating. So to be able to kind of collect more and more things related to that, I'm really happy about. That whole record, plus I think some additional songs, is included as a bonus CD on this deluxe edition of Little Earthquakes. So that's why I was pretty familiar with these songs, and to own them on vinyl, again, it's like chef's kiss, right? But in any case, that is all I have for you. So I hope you enjoyed this. Again, these videos will come out periodically as I add more things to my collection, but I really hope that you enjoyed this. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more videos, reviews, etc. are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.